Hi, everybody. Good night. Good night. Good evening. And welcome to Talk Openly. I'm Jack, and I'm joined here with my wonderful friend Daniel, who I haven't seen in like 3 weeks.
It's
Hey,
been
Daniel.
forever. Howdy, stranger. How's it going?
Howdy. It's going. It's going. It's going.
Oh, that sounds juicy.
Yeah.
We're gonna have
It's
to we're gonna have to deconstruct that. Let's dig into that stuff a
we're
little.
gonna, yeah, I mean, the topic of tonight's part two of the show is stress. So we'll start out, we're going to check in, we're going to do some lojong, and then we're talking about stress.
Oof.
So it's, yeah, yeah, it is quite present in my life at the moment.
I'm just coming off of a stress bender myself.
Oh, tell me about it. I want to hear about your stress bender.
Oh, well, it was one of those things where all of last week and up until I'd say yesterday, probably, I was Mr. Grumpy Pants.
Grumpy
Um,
pants?
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of times there's like a cause, right? You can look at the stressors and be like,
Yeah,
oh, this it's because of this and that and the other thing. But I couldn't tell what it was actually. It was just
yeah,
this it was it was something going on. And I think it may have been like just depleted sort of energetically. I think that I may have been fighting off a bug. My kids had been sick
sure.
the week before, but I didn't feel sick. You know what I mean? Like I just like something wasn't quite right, didn't have enough energy. Then oh man, I was so grumpy all the time, day in and day out. The causes and
Yeah,
conditions for incredible grumpiness were there,
incredible
and
grumpiness. Yeah.
yeah, and
And
it
it
was
didn't help
stress.
that you didn't get to see me for 3 weeks.
I think that I might have been going through withdrawal. They say that withdrawal is an incredible stressor.
It sure is. Yeah.
Yeah, so going through a Jack withdrawal was pretty hard on me, and I hope that you'd never do that ever
I'm
again
sorry,
until you
Daniel.
until you need it. Until you need it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We did have a nice show with Matthew Cruz here. We were talking about
Yeah.
trauma. It
Right.
was really wonderful to have Matthew here talking with me.
Yeah.
I felt like just like our shows, I felt like, oh my gosh, we could just keep going, right?
Yep.
I wanted
For
to learn
sure.
so much more from him. I was intrigued. So, but
I'm very intrigued by these yes, mindfulness strategies for trauma as well. And
yeah,
I've, I've experienced some of that in my own life. And uh but I'd like to get back to it. When I was first getting into Dharma, I was looking at like a lot of different kind of strategies for mental unwellness, basically. And so, I kind of came across all different kinds of things, one of them being mindfulness. Um, I also did this thing called like trauma release exercises, which was developed by this I think he's a psychiatrist, um, and who he visited many places around the world that had experienced like mass traumas, whether from like tsunamis or earthquakes and such. And he developed these exercises of working the body in different ways, kind of holding positions until the body kind of starts to shake uncontrollably. And I guess the idea is that like trauma is held in our bodies. So when we experience a trauma, whether it's adrenaline or kind of tension, it's going to get stored in some ways in our body. And so um, he was using these strategies to, help people of various different languages and backgrounds, who didn't need to have the same language to work through the exercises. And I have to say, it was actually very nice. And very calming. So I recommend looking it up, trauma release exercises or TRE.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, these kind of body-based mindfulness strategies I think are pretty essential,
I
actually.
found that part really fascinating. That the way that the body sort of holds the trauma and how it ends up affecting us on a physical level. Matthew talked about that quite a lot and talked about his approach to like you know, therapeutically helping people with trauma release, starting on a physical level.
Yeah,
And that just blew me away. I always kind of imagined it sort of on this mental,
right,
psychological level, but no, it turns out that we're not so divided up, right? We're not
right.
so fractured, and that in fact trauma informs or affects all aspects of our being.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, and I'm also a very kind of psychological oriented person. Um, and obviously my, my education and my line of work are very kind of psychology focused. But I've found more and more in both my studies and my lived experience that like talk therapy can, at least in my experience, I feel can really only get you so far. And then there's just these other layers to our experience that are much more subtle and work on like a physical level, a subtle physical level,
Yeah.
and even like an energetic level. So yeah, all different kinds of things going on. Glad it was a good talk. That's so fantastic.
Yeah, it
I have to
was.
go back to it.
Yeah, no, it was good stuff. The part of me was wondering afterward. I thought, I wonder if I'm just not aware. You know what I mean? Like if I like I don't think too much like about various traumas that have occurred in my life. And I was sort of like I was telling Matthew, I was like, I have a hard time because in my mind I feel like trauma is just this, like that's how we're formed, right? Like everything is traumatic. The entire experience of becoming a person is traumatic. And he was like, yeah, but that's like little t's and big T, right? Trauma with a big
Yeah,
T. Those are the big hard ones, that really are
right,
important to work on. The little t's, they too you need to work on, but that they don't need quite the same strategies, right?
right. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, yeah, you could say very easily all of samsara is trauma.
Right.
We're
That, yeah,
we're
exactly.
just
But
like swimming in it constantly. But yeah, that there's ones that are really going to leave a heavy mark on our
right.
experience in this life. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly, exactly. And we don't want to minimize that. And that was important to me too, right? Is that that viewpoint, yeah, sure, all of samsara is traumatic, but some traumas are bigger and heavier. They have a greater impact, right, on
yeah,
people than others.
yeah, for sure. Right on.
Yeah,
So
well, what have you been up to?
I've been up to a lot. Yeah, I'm thank you for your flexibility with me taking a couple weeks off. It was helpful. I've been um, swamped with school and also applying for jobs and looking for a new house, and so it's kind of three very big things all at
Hmm.
once. So that's why we're talking about stress tonight. But I would say, in terms of my training, um, it's so interesting how the mind works and that it's really unpredictable. Like there are times in my meditations, I would say for the most part, the last few weeks, that I'm very distracted and thinking about all the things. But then there's moments or there's sits where it's just like they're so clear and really focused and attentive. And so um, I never quite know based off of my state of mind or my mood before I sit if that's actually going to be the sit.
It's
um,
surprising, isn't it?
it's
Right? Like
really
where
surprising.
you might have some inkling like, oh, I'm gonna be incredibly distracted, and then you're just calm and present and collected. And other
Right.
times you sit down, you think, oh, I'm gonna be so concentrated. This is gonna I can feel it. And then you
Yeah.
jump into it and it's just wild, crazy distraction.
Yep. It's so funny. Yeah. Yeah, I was reminded of the like the four wheels of the maybe the chariot of mindfulness or meditation. And one of them is being open to something happening in your meditation. And I really like that because it's pretty broad. And so actually this morning I had a sit where I was kind of considering those four wheels, which include being kind to oneself, becoming a friend to oneself, um, and then being open to something happening, um, being open to relaxation. And then the other one is 25% of that. So the other quarter is focusing on technique. So I find that just very compassionate. I feel like that approach, right, is like, hey, really only a quarter of your focus should be on the technique, but there's all these other things um, that are feel really quite gentle to me,
Yeah.
that are part of it. So yeah, this morning woke up, was thinking about all the things, and then I just kind of remind myself, like, I'm gonna be a friend to my
Yeah.
to me right now, and I'm
Yeah.
also gonna really emphasize the relaxation part, since that hasn't since that's probably like usually like 5% of my experience in meditation right now. So let's overemphasize that, and then also be open to something happening. And it was quite a lovely and peaceful sit. So
Oh
yeah.
man, that's so good. I haven't been thinking about the four wheels of the chariot so much, but I do sometimes have where I'll be frustrated with my meditation experience. This has been happening, definitely over the course of the last week, where I'm just sort of like, I'm frustrated, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm distracted and I can't seem to get collected and can't concentrate, and then I'll hear Lama's voice in my head say, all meditation is good meditation.
Yeah.
And then remember, like, oh, right, actually it softens. It softens, and I'm able to relax into it. And it's incredibly helpful to just be sitting there and remember, like, oh, there's no bad meditation. It's okay, right?
Yeah.
Like yeah,
Yeah.
I'm still doing it, right? And this is helpful. It's good.
I think that's really important. That reminder of like, this is good.
That's
Like
right.
even if it doesn't feel good, like Mama was saying, after every sit, no matter what happened in the sit, say, that was good.
Ah, hmm.
Which is just so sweet,
Yeah.
Um,
Because we
yeah,
want to keep doing it,
we want to
right?
keep doing
And
it.
and
Yeah,
if we develop a habit of like being hard on ourselves, and if it's unpleasant, or we are always sort of critical of the experience or of our technique or whatever, we're going to stop at some point, or at the very least we're not going to accomplish our goals. But it's important, that softness, that gentleness is really critical.
for sure. Yeah, and I was thinking too how at one point, it'd been a few days where all of my sits were just what felt like complete disasters, right? They were still good, but they felt like complete disasters. And I was, there was this little part of my mind that was like, maybe you should give yourself a break, like from
Mm.
meditation. Just give yourself a day from it, because like maybe it's not even helpful to sit when you're in
Oh.
that state of mind, like there was that thought.
Mm.
Um, and I just kind of gently reminded myself, like, even if it's not going the way you think it should, having this routine is so invaluable to my mental clarity and, whatever peace of mind I can find throughout the day. And so I can't stop, you know. And so that was, yeah, we've got to remind ourselves of that. Is like the quality of the meditation is just a subjective opinion. Like it's not actually like what's happening, but what is happening is like I'm developing that skill of returning, of discipline, of connection to my teacher and my sangha and all the teachings. And so that's actually what's important. But it's still frustrating at
Oh
times,
yeah.
like
Yeah, of
big time.
course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Tell me about your training. What's happening in your training? I know you're saying a little bit of chaos as well, or just not distraction for yeah,
Yeah,
not the
yeah. I don't know that it was really chaotic so much. It is more just like I felt really sort of depleted, very, very,
yeah,
very low energy. I had an interesting experience. My meditation is regular, and I'm pretty pleased with my practice. I had this experience the other night though where, man, I had just been, it was like at the peak of my grumpiness, right? And I was trying to exercise my demons by
mm,
doing chores and stuff around the house. And I had this thought. I thought, man, it's getting worse. You should just leave the house, go to the temple. There's no one there. And just go meditate, right? And the thought occurred to me, and I was like, oh, whatever. And I kept going. And then my partner said, "Hey, maybe you should just take a little break and go over to the temple and meditate. That might make you feel better." Like she could
yeah,
tell, like I was
yeah.
not in space. And I thought, well, that's a sure sign that that's what I should do. Right. So I drive over to the temple and I get all situated and I'm like, all right, cool. And I'm like, I'm gonna sit for a while. I'm gonna be here for a minute. I'm really gonna do this thing. And about 12 minutes in, it was very clear that I was actually trying to engage in spiritual bypass, or I
Yeah,
was really, some type of materialism in the sense that I did not want what was. I didn't like the way things were. And what was sitting in front of my awareness was not pleasing to me. And so I had wanted to do something to escape it,
yeah,
and it was interesting because previously in that same day, I had had a similar sort of feeling of wanting to escape, and I thought, man, I could just go to the dispensary, and
mm-hmm,
that thought. And then I was
mm-hmm,
like, whoa, 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 buddy, you've been down this road. Like, that's not. I
yeah,
know what that's all about, and I'm not headed down there, right? But it
yeah,
was interesting to see this, like there was this feeling of wanting to escape, right? And when I couldn't, like escape into a quick dopamine hit in whatever fashion, right? Then I was like, oh, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go meditate this away somehow, right?
yeah.
And no, it was very clear. The message that I received while I was sitting there, I was like, it just was, why don't you go home and go to sleep? It
Yeah,
was a very tender, very soft, very gentle. Just go
yeah,
home and go to sleep. It's okay, right? You don't have to be doing, 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 trying to
right.
make it happen. You can just drop everything and go to bed. And it was the best sort of advice that I could possibly have received in the moment. I just went home, drank a big glass of water, and went to bed. It was like 8 o'clock at night or something, and slept long,
Amazing.
and it was good. It was needed, right? Like that
Yeah,
was the right course of action. But it was really interesting to observe how I wanted something to change.
yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. We want to alter the
That's right.
experience. Yeah, whether it's
Yeah.
like in needing more pleasure or just not having the thing in front of us that's in front of us.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. I mean, it was sort of like in some sense, it was like a hallmark sort of um description or experience of stress, right? There was a lot going on that I didn't know what to do with. I didn't believe that I had the resources required to meet the objectives, whatever. And between those two things, I was like, I'm overwhelmed, right? It's too much. And wanting some form of escape when and maybe maybe some people do use sleep as an escape, not me, not usually
yeah,
anyway. And in this case, it was just like sound advice, right? Just like,
yeah.
yeah, like if there's something that you can do here, right? You can
Hmm.
change a situation. You don't have a lot of energy, and maybe it was really because I was fighting off a bug. I don't know what it was, right? But like, it's okay.
Yeah,
Sometimes the body needs some rest and some hydration.
definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
like you said, sometimes there's no fix. Like it sounds like it was just kind of whatever kind of floating around uncomfortableness
yeah,
was just lingering. And yeah, I mean, I think that's so much of my experience right now too, is like I can't fix it, and it frustrates me, like there's
Yeah.
like everything's just up in the air and
Mm-hmm.
unplaceable. Like there's no
Oh,
place for all the things. They're all just
no.
up. And so, but I can't fix that, and so what do I do in the meantime? And yeah, my kind of escapes, I definitely can get into the TV and food escapes.
Yeah.
Um and last night I watched an episode of Queer Eye, and that was lovely and very wholesome. And like um it felt fine, right? It's kind of like, I'm thinking about, I did the talk on harm reduction a couple weeks ago, and I kind of see that as like a harm reduction approach, where it's like, okay, maybe I could just learn to really just sit with my stress, or just experience my stress, not sit with it, not force myself into it. But um perhaps I could have done a Tara practice or something. But again, maybe that would be a form of spiritual materialism. I'm not
Yeah.
totally sure.
Right.
So I kind of saw that as like, I my brain is not functioning. I'm going to just watch this show, like that's fine, right?
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. Sounds like it was the right medicine for the moment.
For sure, for sure. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
Well,
Well, we're
what do
gonna
you
talk
think?
more about this stuff here in
We
just a
sure
second.
are. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's gonna be great. I think, my spirits are always lifted when we talk. And so, um, yeah, I'm already thanking you for for helping
Yeah,
me with that. Yeah.
same. Well, that's the importance of Sangha, right? As when regardless of what we're going through, having support, the support of our teacher and the support of our community is really important.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. And we can support our mind training with a little random Lojong slogan.
Little random Lojong. And I was thinking about some Lojong today, because I opened up my book earlier. And the slogan that I read was, if you can practice while distracted, you are well trained. And I was like,
Ooh,
yay, okay,
I, I'm well trained.
I'm well trained. Llama has trained me up. It actually felt really encouraging, It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I can do this, I can do it.
Not only can you do it, you are doing it.
It's true. Yes, yes, we are doing it. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's check it out.
Let's do it. Here goes. I'm going to push the button.
Push the button.
Hmm.
Ooh, we haven't
Okay.
gotten this one before. Number 33, don't make insincere comments. So, although the Lojong commentaries vary, this slogan can basically be understood in two different ways. The first way of understanding it is based on the observation that human beings have a tendency to take pleasure in identifying other people's weak points and exploiting them for their own benefit. The second way of understanding the slogan is based on the recognition that since we have the impulse to say hurtful things to others, we often attempt to do it in an underhanded way that doesn't immediately appear hurtful. Charlotte Gabgon. Yeah, what do
Hmm.
you think about that? This is one that I think is not always so obvious because of what he's saying, right? We can be, I can be somewhat underhanded at times with with things that are actually somewhat hurtful. So they kind of, it hides a little bit. It's one of those sneaky afflictions. What do you think?
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I think maybe sometimes it shows up a little bit in my thinking. I'm not so sure how much of it comes out in my speech. Either one of these, actually.
Good.
I see. Yeah, I do. I say good, but I think maybe there's a little bit of a third interpretation that
Hmm.
I find applicable.
Okay.
Um, so I have a tendency to want to avoid conflict with people, and I like people. I like people feeling good and happy about themselves. And so sometimes I'll sort of like I'll say things that are true. They really are a genuine reflection of how I feel about a person, but I'm sort of blowing it up a little bit. you know,
True.
and not and it's not necessary, right? It's like there's like it's like a playful sort of cheerleading or something like
Yeah.
that, where it's not actually like I don't need to be saying it, and it's not coming across necessarily as like it may not even be coming from a sincere place. Like I'm actually trying to get the other person to respond in a certain way, or feel a certain way, or think of me in a certain way. And I think that in that sense, it's insincere. It's not necessarily trying to be hurtful, right? But rather this desire to sort of tweak or change something, and it's not actually a sincere communication.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think where this kind of lands for me is that I can be a little bit passive aggressive in how I deal with conflict. So if I'm like frustrated with something, but am worried about directly communicating what I'm upset about, then it's gonna come out in some other way. And an example of this, not necessarily a comment, right, but an experience is uh, the dining room table is in my place has become kind of like a landing ground for all sorts of things. There's like mail, people put their like backpacks and like all just kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And it
that's what it's for, right,
bothers
Jack?
it bothers me. It bugs me. So what I did instead of directly communicating that like, hey, can we just use the table for meals? I for our chore chart, our like weekly chore chart, I put the roommate down who has this kind of tendency as the one to clean the living room where the dining room table is. So it was kind of like not that it's insincere, but it's indirect. And it kind of like it helps me avoid the conflict of like, hey, I would prefer that this was not the way we did things.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. That's where I'm at
Yeah,
too, Jack. Like it's the same, similar in the sense that I'm trying to find a way to avoid the conflict, right?
right.
And the conflict doesn't have to be like that. That's the interesting thing about it, right? Like it depending on my own state. So if I'm Mr. Grumpy Pants, I really do I need to avoid the conflict because it's going to come
Yeah,
across like, man, that's where it will be sincere, but it will also be hurtful.
right, 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 right,
Right.
right, for
And,
sure.
and it's interesting because in other times, like I'll be in a better place myself, and then I have the capacity to still avoid the conflict. I just sort of like, meh, brush it off or whatever. When,
Right,
it's actually really important to
right.
communicate, right? To just say
Yes,
what you have to say, right? It's
yeah.
actually beautiful. One of my greatest teachers in this regard is a family member who has autism,
Mm,
and doesn't have sort of the normal filters, right?
yeah,
Is as honest as the day is long, and simply says what he means, right? And
yeah,
what he needs and how he feels about whatever. And
yes,
it's illuminating, right? Because I actually find it really refreshing where I'm like, I know where I stand with this person, right? I know what they want of me. I know how they're feeling in the moment, right? And it's not like
yeah.
oversharing or anything. It's just like very straightforward, very plain. And I don't know that I've ever noticed it charged with emotion. It's just sort of like
Right.
matter of fact, right? And I find it so helpful. And yet to do that myself, I find incredibly difficult.
I know. Maybe we should talk about like assertive communication sometime, or maybe
Yeah.
just between the two of us since we're trying to figure it out. I don't know. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
nice. I
Well,
like
that's
this
it.
one.
That's the thing. That was my when I looked into nonviolent communication, right? That was part of my desire was in fact to learn how to communicate in a way that was nonviolent. But the thing is that the way that I've chosen nonviolence is pacifism, right?
Totally.
And the
Yeah.
weird and the bad thing is that it builds up. It causes problems for me where by taking it on myself, right?
Yeah.
And basically just saying like, well, whatever, I'll just tolerate, I'll make it work. I'll clean up the dining room table because
Right.
this is
right.
just this is just the way things are, and I'm the one who wants it to be a certain way, so I will make it that way, and I don't
That's
need to
what I do too.
right? Yeah, exactly. But that's BS because you'll notice, at least if you're anything like me, like that will add to the agitation. It causes that
Yeah.
ruminating and that sort of like, and then the next time the dining room table has clutter on it again, oh man, then anger just gets worse, right? And it just builds up. Whereas if you just clearly communicated, it would be a lot easier.
It would. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And I wouldn't have this feeling of like slight resentment and a little bit of like
Right,
superiority, like,
right.
like and that is, I think, what a lot of like passive
Uh,
aggressiveness like manifests as for me is like um just a little bit of like, I'm better than you. I'm better
yeah.
than you,
Oh my God.
and like
Oh, Jack, you're hurting me here. This has actually been my grumpiness, is because I'm so this whole last week I'm so superior, right? Like, oh
yeah,
my gosh. And then I'm like, dude, like the thought, the idea, like that I am any different, right? Is it's hilarious, right? Like when I observe some kind of behavior that irritates me, it occurs to me, like it's not lost on me that I'm doing that to somebody else. Somebody else is like grossed out by some of my mannerisms or something, right? Where they're like,
yeah,
"Ew, Daniel always does this thing and it's gross."
yeah,
Right?
totally.
And I'm like, "No, no, I'm not a gross person, not at all. You these people are gross, right? They don't know how to behave, but me, I'm okay." And I know it's bullshit, Jack. I know it's bullshit, but I still buy into it, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. Well, it just there's almost something physical that happens where I feel like a kind of repulsion towards like reflecting on my own grossness,
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was,
It's
I was
sad.
I was out walking because I have it. I get like just yes, living with people. You're going to there's a gross factor in living with other people,
Yeah.
right? And I was out walking this morning and I was reflecting on this and I was like, dude, like this is problematic, right? Like this whatever you're feeling here for a number of different reasons. And I noticed that the trees on the side the trees by the sidewalk had some crap had fallen off of them. And I looked at it and I was like, right, like everything is impermanent and changing. Bodies, physical things
Yeah.
are falling apart and leaving detritus all over the place, right? And some of it, I'm like, that's good. And some of it, I'm like, that's bad, right? But
Right.
actually,
Right.
no, that's just me projecting onto it, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, we also can't use that truth and that reality to bypass direct communication, right?
oh, Jack,
Because because
oh,
I will
damn it.
always do that.
You
I
should have
will
just left
always
it
do that.
there. That hurts, but okay. Yes,
It
you're
does
right.
hurt. It does
You're
hurt.
right.
I don't like it. I don't
Me
like it. I'm
neither. Me
sorry.
neither. Okay, so in the next, I'm not going to promise the next week, but
Okay.
in the next month, I
Mhm.
am going to try to make sincere, constructive comments that are in alignment with my needs, desires, expectations, and wants.
Sweet. Me too. I can do that. What's in a month? May
Um,
30th.
May 30th.
And then we'll just stop.
Yeah.
We'll we'll stop directly communicating about our needs after May 30th.
I don't know. Maybe we'll learn something in the exercise. I can feel the whatever the powers that be in the universe are compelling me to do this. This is
Yeah.
not just coming at me from one angle. It's coming at me
Yeah.
from multiple angles, right? And
Yeah.
so I feel like it's like I can hear the call, right? I can hear it. And I'm like, it's like Moses, right? Like, hey, you got to lead my people out or whatever. And he's like, no, no, not me, not me. I feel like that. I'm like, yeah, okay. So like God's speaking to me or telling me like, hey, you need to like be sincere and
Yeah.
communicate in this way. And I'm like, no, 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 right? And it
Yeah.
causes problems.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So
This is a great one for us tonight. I'm so glad we got
yeah,
it.
me too. Me too. And
And
and it wasn't even about being hurtful.
right. Yeah. Interesting. Well,
Mm.
it sounds like we've got to talk about passive aggressiveness and communication and all the things, but maybe at the end of next month.
Yeah, let's do
We've
it.
had
Let's
a
do
little
it.
practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good.
Nice.
Hmm.
Well, we've waded into the waters of stress tonight already.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna dive in, okay?
All right. How do you define
Ready?
stress? Yeah. What do you say stress is?
So I feel like for me, and well, this is a little bit informed by my studies. Um, but stress is like when we have encountered enough situations that are challenging that push beyond our level of coping. So there's, yeah, just a threshold of our coping that the experience has then moved beyond. Um, and that can lead to trauma, a trauma response, or it's a little bit less than that. Um, what do you think? Does that resonate with you, or would you define it differently?
No, I think that that resonates with me. I mean, I think that it's sort of like the tension between the perceived demands on us and the perceived resources that we have to meet those demands or
Yes.
challenges.
Yeah, yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it. Yeah, it makes
Yeah,
sense to me. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You
And
know,
sometimes, I mean,
you know,
I was gonna say that, sometimes stress is not like a big old thing, right? Stresses can be pretty standard. In fact, I think we're experiencing stress throughout the day at various levels. And so sometimes it's within like our ability to cope and our amount of the resources that we have. Um, but yeah, then there's the levels where it's beyond that. I think I'm there.
little s and big S.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I was
Yeah.
looking through some old notes that I had from Lama's talks. I was checking to see if there was anything in these notes about stress, if he said anything about stress. And I thought it was interesting. One of the things that I did discover, it was in a discussion, a talk he gave about patience, right? And he said that stress often arises from our lack of patience and our ability, or rather our inability, to accept and tolerate the current circumstances we face.
Yeah.
I thought that was a interesting way to put it, because that's one thing certainly that it has occurred to me before I even we decided to talk about the subject, before I looked at any notes or thought about it at all. I recognized actually that part of the problem on my end anyway, when I feel stress, is that I want that stress to be gone, and I want it to be gone now, because I can't tolerate what's happening. I don't like it. I want it to go away. I want it to be this other way, because I like comfort and ease, and I like things to be a certain way or whatever it is, right? So there's
Yeah.
this aversion and there's this attachment, right? Which we know is the source of suffering,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
and there it is, and that's how I want it to be something different, and I want it to be different now,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
it's not going to be, right? Looking for houses, or looking for a new home, looking for a new job, right? Getting an education, whatever you're in, these kinds of endeavors, when especially when they're in transition, when there's actual
Right.
movement happening, they take time. It's not going to be resolved right away,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That I think is like, yeah, the most stressful part of my current stress is, yeah, that feeling of wanting it to be resolved and wrapped up, you know? I had a job interview today during my lunch break, did an interview over Zoom. I don't think it went very well. But um in one of the questions they asked me like kind of how do you manage, multiple caseloads and like busy day and meetings and whatnot. And one of the things I said was that um uh this is where anxiety is kind of my friend is that if I can get something done during my day, I will not leave it until the next day. Like I'm going to do it. I will get it crossed off the list. And not leave it for another day. And it was interesting to reflect on that because I was like, you know, I think it was good to be transparent but like maybe that just also shows that I have like a lot of aversion to stress and aversion to things not being resolved.
Yeah.
And so it that was really kind of enlightening enlightening to reflect on during the interview. And just think like, dude, nothing's settled actually. Like
Mm.
nothing is ever
It's
settled.
never going to
It's
settle.
it's never going to settle.
No.
No, there's
No.
always like there's always like things getting kicked up. And on both like the kind of gross level of experience, and then of course on like the very subtle
Yeah.
levels of experience. So yeah, what
You
am
know,
I yeah, go ahead, please.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say I can't help, oftentimes you and I encounter that our strategies, coping mechanisms, whatever, are sort of diametrically opposed. They're opposites, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's the exact opposite in the sense that if something's causing me a lot of stress, like a decision needs to be made or whatever, I'll procrastinate, right? The
Yeah.
exact opposite. I am fine leaving things unchecked for a
Yeah.
while. And part of that is that that strategy has been rewarded on many occasions because a lot of times things continue to change and
Uh-huh.
and then they resolve in some
Yeah.
fashion, and then I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to do anything about it because the thing sort of resolves itself. Now, I'm not saying that's a healthy strategy because it actually increases stress, right? And
Right. Right.
it's not incredibly proactive, right? And so there's problems with that strategy as well, but it's interesting that that changingness, that constant change it can cut both ways, right? The problem
Totally.
can also
Yeah.
get worse, a lot worse, right?
Right.
If you don't do something about it. I want to reflect back a little bit on these notes that I was reading from Lama's talk about patience, because in discussing this, um, he talked about the sort of these three stages of dealing. In this case, he was talking about anger, but I think it relates to stress as well. The first one being acceptance of it, right? So first, of course, you have to be aware of it, but then there's this acceptance of it. Like, yeah, yeah, right. And I had this experience last week. It was amazing to me. Being acceptance of me being grumpy. Like I didn't know the causes and conditions other than that they were sufficient, right? I was stressed enough that I was, you know, showing up as a grumpy person, right?
Yeah.
And so what I noticed is that the acceptance by talking to other people, telling other people, like I told the cashier at the grocery store, I told my kids, I told anybody who would ask when they said like, "How are you?" I was like, "You ever wake up just grumpy?" Like that's how I am. Like I don't know why I'm grumpy. I just am. And that was this acceptance phase where I was like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not even going to explore any deeper right now about like why. I just know that I am." And then I had opportunities to sit in meditation practice and sit with it and look at it
Yeah.
and be like, oh, okay. And that's the second step that Lama was talking about, which was investigation, right?
Mm.
Investigate its essence. What is it? What's really going on here? And then the interesting part is the functionality. That's the third part of this equation, which is what happens next, right? And it's interesting because once we have some acceptance and we gain a little bit of clarity, then we can do something about it. And maybe we need to cross it off today. Maybe it does need to be done today. Maybe it does need to wait until tomorrow, right? Like, and so, but with that clarity, that acceptance, that clarity around it, and allowing it to sort of sit for just a bit, it naturally arises like what can we do about it, right? And it reminds me, actually, what's so funny about it is that, so I asked my 13-year-old daughter, I was at a softball game right before I came here, and I said, "Hey, I'm talking about stress tonight. What do you have to say about stress?" And this 13-year-old kid echoed Shanti Deva perfectly.
Mm.
I don't know that I've ever said this to her. I think it was, something that she came up originally from her own self. It was,
Yeah.
basically, if the problem can be solved, then why worry? Solve it, right? If the problem can't be solved, worrying is not going to do any good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, right, right, exactly that. That is how it is, right? Like
Right.
worrying about it, stressing about it ain't going to do anybody any good."
Right. Yeah. And it's so funny because it just takes it back to like what is within my control what's not, like it's just such an old adage. Like we hear it all the
Uh,
time. Like
how's
there's
that
the
prayer go? How's
yeah,
that prayer
I
go?
was just gonna say the serenity prayer. God bless me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Oh, the
Um,
wisdom to know the difference.
right, because that
Mm.
that is the
Mm.
thing, is that, for example, like this the house hunt that we're doing right now. Like I swear, I turn into like a different being where like I am just like every single moment of free time I have is devoted to pursuing this thing. It's not good for my health. It's not good for my roommate's health. Like I'm very demanding of like my time and others when things feel like eminently, you know, important. Um, and what was in my control, right, is that okay, yes, I do have the in within my control. I can contact these landlords, I can share our information with them. What's not in my control is when they get back to me. And there's this one in particular who like, man, like she just um was very hard to get in contact with, then did get in contact with us, gave us some great information, and now has been like out of contact. And so like
Mm.
there's this feeling of like, should I contact her? Like, do I need to like message her again? Like what's going on? And so there is like, what is the wisdom there? Like how do I know like what is in my control and what's not? And so I think what I'm coming to is like, actually what's in my control is how I handle myself with all of this. Like I can do all of this that I'm doing. I know that I have the capacity to, like, but is it also unnecessary? Like the level of like just kind of on it that I am with it right now?
Yeah.
Or can I
Yeah.
can I ease up a little bit and just say, we've put in some applications and we're in contact with people and now I get to just be patient.
Yeah, that relaxing part I think is so critical because fixation unfortunately does deliver results.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately and unfortunately. So
Yeah.
by fixating and putting a lot of energy on something, you will make something happen,
Yeah.
right? But a lot of times it turns out to not be as good as it could have been if you had relaxed a little bit, right? And I
Yep.
think that that's where what's really interesting about it when trying to resolve issues or come up with solutions to problems, that relaxing part is really important, and there's an aspect of playfulness that ought to be encouraged, right?
Yeah.
A curiosity, a little okay, I put in applications, I went on to roommates.com or I went to rent.com, whatever the dot coms are that you're supposed to
Yeah.
go to do these things. And you know what, instead I got out my bicycle or my skateboard or my shoes or whatever, went out for a walk or went out for a ride and just look for some signs in the windows for places for
Hmm.
right and relax and enjoy the sun and talk to some people and tell them about my situation. And lo
Yeah.
and behold, right, like something arises, something comes along that surprises us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm reminded too of like that like the beginner's mind, I think, is a
Yeah,
very
that's right.
relaxed mind.
Yes.
Um, it's so funny, I was first kind of getting into the Dharma and going to the temple in 2018. And for the next year, I just remember like encountering stressful situations and being like, hey, this is a Dharma moment. Like, what if I just like chill? And it's things were just kind of easier. And I'm alive, I'm still here, right? And so it's funny, I think there's some kind of like needing to return to that really kind of like just beautiful curiosity of the
Yeah,
beginner's mind that's like, hey, dharma is freedom.
that's
Like
right.
I don't need to be stressed about all this samsaric bullshit that doesn't actually matter.
No,
Like it's quite
right.
beautiful, right?
Exactly. It remind you were when you were talking about that, it reminded me of when you're trying to untangle some rope or string or something, and how if you pull really hard, you get really tight. It just
Yeah,
gets, I mean, it's maddening, right? It just makes it
yeah,
so bad. But if you just relax and sort of
yeah.
fluff it up a little bit and, play with it and
Uh-huh.
tease it, then
Yep.
before you know it, it's been fun and the whole thing is undone, right? It's all
Right.
unraveled and the problem is solved. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. It'll get it all knotted up again. Don't worry.
Right. Right. And during the unraveling, there's gonna be like those moments where you're like, I think I need to go back, or like this doesn't seem right. This isn't
Right,
working
right.
out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, that there is the possibility. In fact, we have such a great example of it in our teacher. Um, there's that ability to be present and peaceful regardless of what's happening. You know, Lama has a business. He's a teacher for a growing temple and is also like building a house in Washington. Like that's a lot on one's plate, right? And I just have to be reminded that all of that's possible. It's
And
not like he's faking
yeah.
it, he's not
No,
faking it.
no, no, he's not faking, and he's not a spring chicken either,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I that's exactly it, is that he has this great spaciousness, right, that
yes,
allows the sort of the wind, if you will, to move him, right?
yeah,
And he knows how to use these energetic currents. And that's the thing about stress and some of the other charged emotional states, is that's energy, right? That's
right.
like, we can, if we're skillful, we can use that to move us, right? Like, we don't have to be crushed by it. We don't have, it doesn't have to be negative. We can use it as a way to grow, to develop, and to even achieve, practical aims.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Hey, I'm
Yeah.
curious. I'm curious. So we talked a little bit about mindfulness, right? And certainly mindfulness when we are stressed out is incredibly helpful. I was curious. I've had some decent experience recently with mantras around stress,
Oh,
and
cool.
and I was curious. Do you ever, when you feel stressed out, do you ever use mantras?
I do. Yeah. Yeah, mantras have a little bit become kind of uh second nature where sometimes I'll encounter something and it'll just spur me to kind of, say a mantra in my mind. And that it most often happens when I'm feeling concerned or, compassionate for someone I see who's not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kind of do like some Omani Padme Hum or like some Tara mantras. Um, but as for myself, no, I don't kind of extend that as much. Like sometimes it'll come on and I'll do a Tara mantra and do the kind of have it be on the out breath and
Yeah.
which is very relaxing. Um but yeah, like I was thinking today, like it would have been so good before my interview to do like some Vajrayogini mantras, like kind of bringing in all of this
Yeah.
energy, right? And
Yeah.
attracting all of the energy of the Buddhas, and then maybe some Tara, like peaceful, like various action. Um, but yeah, that was an afterthought.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
know.
something. Yeah, yeah,
It's interesting. So for Llama's birthday is coming up in June, and as part of it, there's an opportunity to do like mantra accumulation, right?
right, yeah.
And this year we're doing Vajraguru mantras, and so it's kind of interesting. I've kind of I don't know, like, I get fixated sometimes, right? And this has been really helpful. So it's been interesting that I do a ton of them. I have my little mala beads, right? And I oftentimes do it while driving or walking or whatever. And it's really kind of fascinating to see how it works, especially with the stress stuff.
Mm.
So I noticed, for example, I'm really stressed out, that I'm like fast, and I'm like kind
Yeah,
of
right?
aggressive, I'm aggressively moving through the malas, and then I'm
Yep.
like doing it at a rapid clip. and I'm doing that while not being very mindful,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
Like my
Yeah.
mind is so, and it's interesting, we've talked about, road rage and things like that in the past. And it's fascinating to me. So I'm stressed out, so I'm more prone to anger, right? Like I'm not
Mhm.
stressed out right now, but when I was, then I'm more
Yeah.
prone to anger. So driving brings up for me, and so it's really interesting. I'll find myself doing these mantras really fast, right? Kind of aggressively, and having these raging, violent thoughts, right, while driving. And but here's the beauty is that at some point, because the mantra is happening, it's just it's going, it's coming, like there's energy going out into the vocalization and into counting or whatever, and there'll be a realization, and it happens relatively quickly where I'm like, oh, hey, these two things are somewhat incompatible, right? Like, why are you doing this mantra, right? You want to develop wisdom mind, you want help overcoming obstacles, right? Well, these are the obstacles that cause stress, right? This
Yeah.
anger, for example, is only going to increase your stress. And if you act on it, it's really going to increase your stress, right? And so in that way, like it's so fascinating to me, right? Like we could talk about mantras all day about the different ways in which they affect us, but just in this very sort of plain, practical way where just doing it and noticing, like, oh, right, I'm doing this in a stressed out way, and that my thinking is incompatible with the energy of the
Right.
mantra itself. It's fascinating how it sort of like brings me back into alignment.
Yeah, I noticed you kind of shift your posture. There is kind of like that when you're doing matches, there's, yeah, that recognition of like, oh yeah, what am I doing? Here I
Yeah,
am.
right,
And
right.
kind of like you
Yeah.
do kind of adjust both physically and mentally. Um, yeah, I do have to say I really appreciate the Vajraguru mantra. I think Guru Rinpoche is one of the most fascinating figures of like all history, right? And any depiction of him is just so striking. And something that I've noticed in when I'm doing mantras, and I also try and do kind of a visualization when I'm doing the mantra and kind of imagining. Sometimes I'll imagine the non-wrathful form, so like the human form of
Yeah.
Guru Rinpoche, and then other times I'll do the wrathful one. And there is this very like energetic quality to like to him, I think, like his eyes are just like so like big and
Yeah.
just kind of to pull you in um and yeah, there is definitely like a it's almost like I'm being tamed. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we're talking about stress, it's like there's this way that our kind of connection to these um you know uh guru yoga, these deities and these representations of these qualities that we're trying to bring in, it's taming, right? We're taming the
Hmm.
mind.
That's right.
And so yeah, what better thing to do when you're stressed than like it's just kind of let's tame that mind. Let's bring in
Yeah.
some Guru Rinpoche energy.
That's right,
Holy
because
cow.
it is the untamed wild mind that is the source of the problem, right? Like so in that sense, the taming is calming and will help. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about it.
And taming that like very kind of it feels very immature that like I'm gonna try and control it. I'm gonna
Yeah.
figure out the way to put all of this stuff in a box and it's gonna stay there and I'm not gonna have to
Hmm.
deal with it again. But instead that, like you said about mama, this openness to,
Yes.
yeah,
Ah,
oh actually we can't box it, but we can be masterful within all
that's
of this.
right. We can surf it. We can use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hell yeah.
Hmm.
Daniel, this has been awesome. I can't believe we're at 8 o'clock as usual. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack. I'm so happy
Yeah,
you're back.
me too. I'm gonna actually go do some Guru Rinpoche
Nice.
practice. Yeah,
Awesome.
it's gonna be good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. I really appreciate you and our
Thanks,
listeners as
Daniel.
well.
Yeah, thanks, friends. We'll see you next week.
Bye bye.